Destruction rarely announces itself with noise. It doesn't kick down the door screaming. It doesn't arrive with banners, explosions, or speeches. It seeps in slowly, invisibly, in the silence between breaths, in the pause between actions, in the people you never notice, the ones you never hear coming. Look closely at history, and you'll find this pattern repeating, not with the loud, the flamboyant, or the obvious, but with the quiet. They're the ones sitting at the back of the room, eye scanning every detail, the ones who don't interrupt, who don't push, who don't chase attention, the ones who listen, who wait, who think, and when they move it's precise, it's deliberate, it's irreversible. The world forgets them until it's too late, until something breaks, until something burns, until something that once seemed stable, unshakable, permanent collapses. A quiet man once stood in a courtroom and gave a speech that shook an empire. A quiet mathematician once wrote code that cracked an unbreakable war machine. A quiet student once lit the spark that ignited a revolution. This isn't fiction. This is the overlooked truth of power. That silence is not absence. It is potential. Energy compressed, the storm held back not by weakness, but by will. What if the real threat isn't the one shouting in the streets, but the one standing still? What if the most dangerous person in the room is the one who says nothing? Because silence holds two faces. One is peace, the other is pressure, and pressure builds. You don't hear a volcano before it erupts. You don't hear the crack in the ice before it swallows the ground. And you don't hear the quiet ones until the world is already changing. They're not coming, they're already here, and they're watching, waiting, deciding, planning. This, is how quiet people destroy everything, not with chaos, but with silence sharpened into precision, with stillness that moves mountains. With eyes wide open, in a world that never saw them coming, they've been called many things. Introverts, observers, lurkers, loners, but the labels miss the truth. They reduce complexity to a cliche, because the quiet one is not simply shy or socially awkward. They are something deeper, something ancient, something misunderstood. The quiet one is an archetype, a recurring figure throughout time and culture. In myths, they're the watchful wanderer, the monk in the mountains, the outcast with insight. In stories, they're the ones who say little but know much, the character we ignore until the climax, when it's their silence that saves or damns everything. Psychologists have tried to decode them. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow self, the hidden parts of our psyche that we suppress, deny, or don't even recognize. For the quiet ones, the shadow is often massive because so much remains unspoken. The pain they swallowed, the thoughts they never voiced, the anger they buried, not because they were harmless, but because they were controlled. Their silence isn't weakness, it's armor. It's what they build when the world is too loud, too fast, too cruel. When speaking means being misunderstood, when feeling means being vulnerable. So they choose not to fight in the open. They turn inward, they analyze, they study every room they walk into. They don't interrupt because they already know what you're going to say. But this stillness, it comes with a cost. Because while they observe the world rarely sees them. And in that invisibility, resentment can grow. Isolation sharpens thought. Neglect distills rage. And slowly, beneath the surface, something evolves. A quiet person is rarely just quiet. They may be calculating. They may be protecting something. They may be dreaming of a world that doesn't exist yet. Or they may be building the exact tool that will tear down the one that does. Nietzsche warned us, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. But what happens when no one sees the monster at all? What happens when the war is internal, until it isn't? The quiet ones are often invisible, until they're inevitable. Not everyone hears them, but history remembers them. Sometimes the most devastating fires don't start with flames. They begin as embers, small, unnoticed, smoldering in silence. History is full of these embers, quiet people, invisible figures, men and women who lived in the shadows, until the world was forced to look at what they had become. Adolf Hitler, long before the rallies, the speeches, and the war, was a failed artist, withdrawn, humiliated, rejected by society again and again. He wandered, Vienna voiceless, homeless, irrelevant. People passed him on the street and didn't remember his face. But inside, something was building, a narrative, a hatred, a vision, and when the world was finally forced to listen, it was already too late. The quiet man had become the storm. Gavrilo Princip was just a teenager, sickly, poor, barely 5 feet tall. He wasn't a soldier or a leader. He didn't shout his beliefs. He carried them in silence, until he fired a single shot that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and triggered World War I. Ted Kaczynski was a mathematical prodigy. By 16, he was at Harvard. By 25, he had a PhD. Then he vanished into a remote cabin in Montana. No electricity, no running water. For 17 years, he said almost nothing to the world, until the packages started arriving, until the bombs began to explode, until the Unabomber emerged, not out of noise, but from absolute isolation. And then there's Satoshi Nakamoto, if that's even a real name. No speeches, no interviews, no face, no voice, just a white paper uploaded online in 2008, 9 pages. One idea, and it changed global finance forever. These aren't just footnotes in history. They are proof of a pattern. The quiet ones do not remain quiet forever. They are the minds beneath the floorboards, the fuse under the surface. They observe, they endure, and then they act, not impulsively, not carelessly, but with intent, with purpose, because they've had time to think, time to plan, time to become something the world never expected and was never prepared for. This is the slow burn, not a scream, but a whisper that grows louder with every ignored injustice, with every humiliation, with every system that rewards noise over nuance. And by the time the world hears them, they've already rewritten the rules, or broken them entirely. What drives a quiet person to the edge? The answer isn't simple. It's not a single moment or emotion. It's a slow, layered construction, built from silence, restraint, and the deep architecture of the human mind. At the core is introversion, but not the social stereotype of being shy. True introversion is internal focus, a mind that processes deeply, continuously, obsessively. While others react, the quiet person reflects. While others speak to be heard, they think to understand. This means they experience life differently. They replay conversations long after they end. They remember slights others forget. They notice patterns others miss, and they accumulate emotions, unanswered questions, until they overflow. And when you live inside your own head for too long, the line between reality and perception begins to blur. Add to that another ingredient, alienation. When society rewards the loud, the bold, the charismatic, the quiet feel unseen. Not just ignored, dismissed. They speak up, and their words are overlooked. They step back, and no one asks why. Over time, they start believing the world doesn't want them, only their silence. So they give it, and in that silence, something else begins to grow. Resentment now introduced the final piece. Control. Most quiet people are hyper-aware of their They crave stability in an unstable world. When everything feels out of their control, they do what they can. They control themselves, their routines, their words, their reactions. They build an internal fortress.com on the outside, calculated within, but even the strongest fortress cracks. Even the most disciplined mind can hold back everything, and when it breaks, it doesn't explode, it executes. Because by the time a quiet destroyer acts, they've already imagined the consequences. They've already weighed the ethics, the risks, the backlash, and they've accepted it. They don't react, they decide. With clarity, with precision, with finality. They are not chaos, they are the response to chaos, a correction, a rebalancing of something they believe has gone too far, too long, and that's what makes them terrifying. Because unlike impulsive destruction, theirs is thought out, researched, predicted, inevitable. They don't just burn it down, they leave behind a blueprint for something else, something they think will be better, or at least quieter. In today's world, the loudest voices are everywhere, feeds overflowing with opinions, notifications screaming for your attention, algorithms rewarding outrage, influencers, streamers, brands, all screaming into the digital void. But underneath all that noise, something else is happening, something quieter, something deeper, something colder. There is a silent rebellion taking place, not on stages or soapboxes, but in code, in servers, in encrypted messages, in anonymous posts buried beneath 1,000 memes. Because in this hyper-connected age, being quiet doesn't mean being uninvolved. It means choosing a different kind of power. It means watching while the world burns through headlines. It means understanding systems, not just screaming at them. Edward Snowden didn't start a revolution with a protest. He was invisible, a systems analyst buried in the machinery of power. And then he flipped the lights on. One leak and the illusion cracked. Surveillance wasn't theory anymore, it was fact. And suddenly, governments, corporations, and billions of people had to face a new truth. The watchers had been watched. But Snowden wasn't unique. He was part of a new archetype, the silent digital dissident. Consider QAnon, no clear leader, no manifesto, just cryptic drops and anonymous riddles. Yet somehow, millions followed, believing, searching, acting, whether you see it as a dangerous cult or a crowdsourced resistance. The method is undeniable. Low volume, high impact, a quiet idea spreading like wildfire. Then there's Bitcoin, born from a 9-page paper written by no one, or someone or many. To this day, no one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And yet, that anonymous whisper has shaken the foundation of global finance. No campaign, no CEO, just code, just math, just a quiet challenge to the loudest systems on earth. Money, banks, control, and beyond the headlines, in the deepest threads of Reddit, GitHub, Tor, there are silent creators building empires in the dark. One developer, alone in a room, can create a protocol that reshapes communication. One moderator on an obscure forum can ignite ideological warfare. One open source contributor can break open monopolies. These are not the rebels of yesterday. They don't wear uniforms. They don't march in streets. They sit in silence. They observe. They build. And then they release something that can't be taken back. This is the quiet rebellion. It is decentralized. It is faceless. It is growing. Because while the world numbs itself with noise, distraction, and endless performance, there are those who've chosen another path. To disconnect, to listen, to understand. And when they act, it's not to go viral. It's to shift the axis beneath everything. Ideological warfare is no longer fought with slogans and manifestos. It's fought in gig commits, in anonymous leaks, in subcultures that don't seek permission, only possibility. Modern society is drowning in volume, but that doesn't mean the quiet ones are gone. It means they've adapted, they've hidden, and in hiding, they've evolved. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence becomes power, and the ones who master it don't need to be seen to win. Walk into any classroom today, and you'll see the pattern begin. Hands raised, voices eager, participation points. The child who speaks first, who dominates the space, is praised. The one who waits, who thinks, who questions quietly is forgotten, maybe even punished. They're labeled shy, antisocial, not a team player. From the very start, we reward noise. We encourage volume over value, performance over perspective. And slowly, we begin to teach a dangerous lesson. If you're quiet, you're wrong. This doesn't end in school. It mutates in corporate culture. Meetings are arenas. Those who interrupt posture, self-promote rise. Those who pause, who weigh their words, who listen, disappear. Their silence is mistaken for weakness. Their restraint for incompetence. Even in media, the pattern holds. The algorithms favor the outrageous, the dramatic, the controversial. Thoughtfulness is too slow for the feed. Complexity doesn't trend. You're rewarded for being loud, not being right. And so the quiet ones withdraw, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know no one's really listening. They become outsiders, ghosts, not fitting in, not playing along, watching the world from a distance and wondering if it's all just noise masking something rotten underneath. This is how society breeds silent destruction, not through violence but through neglect. 1,000 small humiliations bullying, masked as just teasing, exclusion passed off as just being honest. And all the while the thinkers, the feelers, the observers are pushed further to the edges until something cracks. Some retreat into nihilism, some retreat into fantasies of justice, of retribution, of revolution. Some build systems of belief so far removed from the mainstream, they begin to question if the mainstream is even real. And some act out not impulsively, not irrationally, but with the cold clarity of someone who's seen too much, said too little, and been ignored for too long. The real tragedy isn't that quiet people destroy things. It's that they're often destroyed first. Not physically, but spiritually dismissed, misunderstood, until silence becomes the only language they trust. Are we building a society that silences its most insightful minds until silence becomes the sharpest weapon in the room? Because when you punish depth and reward volume, when you shame stillness and glorify performance, you don't just lose balance, you lose brilliance. And in that void something else rises, not chaos but correction, quiet, ruthless, inevitable. A dam doesn't leak, it bursts. For years it holds, it withstands pressure, it adapts. But pressure doesn't disappear, it builds. And one day, without warning, the silence ends. Not with a trickle, with a flood. This is the tipping point. The moment when the quiet stopped watching, stopped waiting, stopped hoping the world will change on its own. They've been patient, dangerously so. They've studied every flaw in the structure, mapped every crack, listened to every lie. And now they act, but not with rage, with intent, because the quiet don't explode like fireworks. They erupt like volcanoes. You don't see it coming until it's already too late. The whistleblower who dismantles an empire with a single file. The anonymous coder who launches a currency that redefines global economics. The silent mind that writes a manifesto read by millions, changing the way an entire generation thinks. They are not always heroes. They are not always villains. But they are always catalysts. Revolution doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a blank stare. And the most dangerous people in any system aren't the ones screaming to tear it down. They're the ones who stop speaking altogether, because when the quiet decide to act, they don't just disrupt the story, they rewrite the ending. Not with noise, but with certainty, with clarity, with finality. Silence isn't emptiness. It's not absence. It's not weakness. It's potential. It's the space between thought and action. The breath before the strike, the stillness before the storm. Silence is awareness. It is control in a world addicted to chaos. It is the ability to watch without being seen, to understand without being understood. And yet, when that power is ignored, mocked, or cornered, it mutates, becomes shadow, becomes danger, becomes a force that does not ask for permission, only consequence. Not all quiet people destroy, but when they do, it is never by accident. It is the world that taught them silence was survival, until survival required something more. So now ask yourself, are you listening to the quiet around you, to the ones in the back of the room, behind the screen, outside the algorithm? And more importantly, are you listening to the quiet within yourself? That voice you keep pushing down, that pause before truth, that resistance to speak, not out of fear, but out of depth. Maybe that's not hesitation, maybe that's power, and maybe that power is just beginning to awaken.